This happened so many years ago. I was in the 3rd or 4th grade in the early 1980s. I lived in a very rural area with many small towns surrounded by woods. One day, I was so excited to have permission from my parents to go directly home from school with a friend on her bus. Side note, my parents both worked long hours, unlike so many of my friends that had stay-at-home moms at the time. I was normally a latchkey kid, so anyway, I was going to go home with my friend on her bus for the first time. I even had a nice note from my mom about my trip home with my friend to hand to the bus driver after we got on the bus. I was super excited because my friend really lived in the woods. I had gone to her birthday party over the summer and we collected fireflies and slept in an actual tent. This was so cool to me because I lived close to the town center and didn't even have a tent. So here we are on the bus. We sat in the middle at first, then slowly moved up towards the front of the bus as kids got off. My friend lived just before the town line on a road that headed out of town, so hers was the last stop. Towards the end of the ride, we were right up front behind the driver, who played some awesome tunes via popular radio station WAAF. My friend, who was a bit of an odd little duck, was bopping to the beat of the song on the radio, while I was just looking out the front window of the bus directly behind the driver. Just then the driver turned his head to me and says, "Hey, what would you girls do if I didn't drop you off?" I was instantly spooked and looked towards my friend, who was still bopping away to the song. What? I stammered. I was not used to talking to adults. I don't know, but I knew what I heard. "Oh, nothing," he replied. He was just pulling up to my friend's stop and just pulled over to let us out. I've thought about this many times over the years, wondering why would he have said that. Then I wonder, what if my friend's mom wasn't home? Would he have stopped or driven us out in the middle of nowhere? Also, since this was her everyday bus, why wasn't that creep a worry for my friend? I've since gone on to grow up and raise kids in the same area, but I can't help to think about why the driver picked that day to get all weird. I never told any adults as I was a kid, and after we got off the bus, it was no longer my worry. But yeah, creepy bus driver, let's not meet again. Actually, as a fully grown woman, let's meet and I could kick the crap out of your creepy ass. When I was 10 years old, my family relocated from Delaware to South Carolina for my dad's job. We had lived near all our family and had never moved before. One of Dad's selling points about the move was that people in the South were so friendly. I had just finished 5th grade and would be starting 6th in South Carolina. I rode the bus to and from school in Delaware, so there wasn't a lot of anxiety about riding the bus after we moved. 6th grade started, and I was excited about my new school and loved my teacher. Dad was right, people in the South are polite and friendly. Well, most of them are. Anyway, one day in the fall, I got off the bus at my stop after school, and a man in a dark green Volkswagen Beetle that was behind the bus pulled off the main road and called out to me as I was walking towards my house. I turned around and proudly even smiled at him. I had no real stranger danger fears at the time. I walked up to the driver's side of the car to see what he wanted. I figured he'd wanted to ask for directions or something, and I planned to tell him I just moved here and didn't know. But, oh boy, he didn't need directions. He was going after something entirely different. He smiled at me and said something I didn't catch, comprehend, or understand. So I said, "What? Excuse me?" to get him to repeat it. I got a little closer so I could hear him better, and he said, "Wanna come over?" which wasn't what he said before. So at the time, I didn't know what that meant, except that maybe I kind of did, and knew that was a bad thing to say to someone my age. I turned and ran to my neighbor's house, and didn't look back. I was crying, and they called my mom and my parents and called the police about it. A couple days later, the police department had a sketch artist come meet my parents and I at the station to work with me. I did the best I could, but honestly, I wasn't studying the man's features or even trying to remember his face at the time of the incident, so I don't know how accurate it was. My parents and I thought that this was the end of it. Nobody really thought they would find him. The cops were saying things like if they found him, he could go to jail for a while for his obscene question to me. My mom was nervous if it would go as far as me testifying in court, and she didn't feel good about putting me through that. She was worried that even as an undeveloped 10-year-old child, the defense would attempt to shame me in some way or say I was asking for it. About a week later, I was again getting off the bus, and I hear a car horn beep. I look to see, and it was the same guy, same Volkswagen Beetle, smiling and waving at me. I was stunned. I blankly waved back for some reason, but at the same time memorized his tag number. I repeated it to myself over and over as I ran to my house to write it down and call my mom. Cops were notified, and the guy was identified. He lived about 20 minutes away in another town. His local cops knew and were friendly with his family, the good old boy system. So, he didn't go to jail, but apparently they told him to stay away from me. I never saw him again, and hope I never do. I wonder how much times he might have followed the bus and watched me that I never knew about. Dear pervert predator, let's never meet again. So, when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was about 5'3" and about 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was, quote, busy. I later found out he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day, I was the only one. So I sat at a bench and had one headphone in and one out so I could listen to music and to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, 2 men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy and pasted the same text to my cousins, who were home. I lived with my aunt and 2 other guy cousins. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men. I didn't get any responses though. When they got out the car, they started to walk towards me, so I got up from the bench, walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little late though. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello, as the other stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and nod, then looked away. Then the same guy, I'll call him number 1, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number 2, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some. Do you want some? Then number 2 asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me they just got back from Russia, but the way he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they have drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight-edge student in high school, but I was not stupid either. I would never get into someone's car that I didn't know. Then number 1 asked me if I have a car. I said no, and that my bus is almost here. Sorry, I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they were asking me questions. But before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I needed anything. He even stated he'd give me a free car. The card looked shifty, and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew I needed that number on it to report it, so I took it and walked off super fast. Finally, the bus stopped and picked me up. As soon as I got on, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said she saw them around me, but thought I knew them because they were so close to me. The driver called into her dispatch, saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick all the other students up, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out, and so did the campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and proceeded to ask me questions about the other men, their car, and the questions the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. Then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call it and act like my dad, so he did. It was on speaker, and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it was burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he said that, one hung up. They tried calling again, and the phone was shut off, then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything they were saying. She's so lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park, because they had chosen the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go to wherever they wanted. I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, and mom and cousins were all there out front. The women were all in tears, and the men were all livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school, not far from the park, was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by 2 guys. The other kids stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there and had me choose the 2 guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out pretty fast. They were caught. It was in fact those 2 guys that talked to me that were the ones who tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad. She went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scarred, but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful for that girl who was saved by the courageous kids at her high school. This encounter happened to my mom when she was in middle school, early 70s. Her family lived outside of town, so she rode the bus to and from school. She was in 6th grade and had a quote boyfriend who also rode her bus. They would sit together and hold hands, but they were not inappropriate with their interactions. The bus driver took notice of their relationship and started to make comments to them. He'd asked if they kissed a lot, and if they quote tongued, and once even asked them if he sniffs her. Not knowing what to do, they just did their best to ignore him. On the last day of school, the bus route went as usual, except that the driver skipped my mom's stop. When he stopped at the next house, several miles away, she tried to get off the bus with one of her girlfriends. The kids all knew each other pretty well, and they were all friends. The driver stopped her from trying to get out and made her go sit back down. Every stop after that, she tried to get off the bus, and he'd tell her to go sit back down until she was the last one left on the bus. She was already terrified and crying. She kept trying to get out with every kid that was leaving off the bus, but he wouldn't let her. She said she doesn't remember if she was praying out loud or not, but she remembers just begging for an idea of how to get away. The driver told her to move to the front of the bus, right behind his seat. Instead, She picked up her things and moved to the very last seat. On her way, she set her books and things in the middle aisle, hoping that if he came after her, he would be slowed down by them. He finally started back down her road towards her house, but turned off into a dirt road leading back to some brush. She finally decided that if he even slowed down enough, she was going to get out the back emergency door and run for it. As he turned onto another dirt road, deeper into the brush, she happened to glance out the back window and see her dad and her older brother, he was an adult, in their truck following behind. She shouted up to the driver, "You better stop this bus right now." "That's my dad behind the bus." He stopped the bus and opened the doors to get her off, but she was too scared to move. Within a few seconds, her dad was on the bus standing up next to the driver so that she could walk around behind him. He told her to go get in the truck with her brother. As she sat in the truck, she could see her dad through the back window of the bus going off on the guy. Verbally only, unfortunately. When her dad got back into the truck, he hugged her like never before, and she just lost it crying. She knew her dad was scared that she just escaped with her life. Now, this wasn't just a coincidence that her dad had found her. Every kid who got off the bus after they missed my mom's stop had gone home and told their parents that the driver wouldn't let her off the bus and that she was really scared and crying. The parents all called my grandparents to let them know the stories that they were getting. My grandparents never reported the incident to the police or the school, but they did talk to the owner of the bus company, and they said they saw the guy driving again. My mom believes that they didn't report it to the police because her dad had threatened the driver's life, and he would in turn report that to the police. My grandfather went to his grave without ever revealing what he had said to the bus driver. Several years later, my mom was talking about her mother-in-law, Grandma C, and about Grandma C's cousin, who was married to a guy from my mom's hometown. Grandma C was telling her about this guy in prison impregnating his 14-year-old stepdaughter. As an off-cut remark, she mentioned that he used to drive a school bus in the district where my mom went to school. My mom almost passed out at this news. She asked his name, and it was given the name of the bus driver who abducted her all those years ago. I know, I feel the same way that they should have said something to the police and had arrested him long before he found another potential victim. I believe they made a mistake in that regard, but I'm glad the creep ended up in prison.